Good morning, Highlands Presbyterian. So today we're starting a series about the basic rhythm of our faith. We begin at the beginning. We're going to start with creation, Genesis 1, moving from there to the fall. Once we hit the fall, we're going to talk about redemption. And then on the other side of redemption, once we're redeemed, we have future hope. So we'll talk about that. And then amazingly, it'll be time for us to begin our Lenten journey towards the cross, through death, into life. And the way it seems like life moves so quickly, pretty soon it'll be summer, and then all of a sudden we'll be shopping for Christmas decorations again. It's amazing how quickly life seems to go these days. But today we're focused on creation. We focus on how God created, what the implications of what we believe about creation are for our lives. And we start with God's purpose. And purpose matters. So Friday afternoon, boarded an airplane. I was in Atlanta, I was in New Orleans, headed for Atlanta. And every single person was on that plane for a purpose. None of us would have been satisfied if it was just a recreational flight that landed somewhere else, because that would have delayed the satisfaction of our purpose for boarding the plane. There's 200 of us. It's amazing. I like to sit in the aisle. Otherwise, I end up sitting at the window. And I stare at the wing the whole time and wonder if the engines are going to fall off. So I sit in the aisle, and it's amazing how many people get on an airplane. Every single one of them has a different purpose for traveling. Some are for fun, some are for work, some are to go see family. But there's a different purpose. But all of it, that goal is accomplished once we reach Atlanta. If you've ever been on a flight where everybody claps when the plane lands, it's a cool feeling where everyone is overjoyed to have reached this, to celebrate this mutually reached goal. Nobody clapped when we reached Atlanta. Certainly nobody clapped when we reached Columbus, because we'd all looked out the window and seen all the snow that was here, and I think we were all sad. Maybe we should have asked the pilot to take us back. But when we talk about God as creator, we think about the purpose with which God created. As Christians, we believe that God created the earth and all that is in it. We believe that God created out of nothing, and that God created through the power of God's spoken word. God didn't start with something that already existed and reform parts of that. What we believe is that there was nothing, and then God spoke, and then there was something. It sounds to me an awful lot like a Big Bang. This is important because it means that creation is separate from God. We're not just a part of God. Creation is not this extension of God, but God is separate and completely different. And to say that an omnipotent God, dwelling in perfect harmony, decided to create is to say the transcendent God who exists outside of, again, and separate from creation, is generous and welcoming. We're talking about God's purpose. It is to give life to others, to make room for others, to dwell in perfection, and then to create a universe, is to pour out love in such a way that you invite others to come share in that same perfection that God has enjoyed for perpetuity. We know that God created with the purpose to enjoy creation, because Genesis tells us that when God had finished creation, what did God say at the end of every day? It is good. And then at the end of 6 days, on the seventh day, God rested. All was complete. God enjoyed creation, and that comes through in other parts of the Bible when God is walking with Adam and Eve in the cool of the evening, when God is talking to Job out of the whirlwind, and God is talking with such pride about the animals that God has created. If you create something and you don't love it, you don't intervene in the way that God does. You don't sit back and enjoy it like this. Anybody who's ever seen a Keith Jones original work of art knows that I am a terrible artist. There's not many of them out there for this reason. When I'm drawing or painting something, there's a point, usually pretty early on, which I realize it looks terrible, and I usually just walk away from it. I don't love it. It's not good. But if it was good, I'd try and restore it. I'd try and fix the mistakes. I'd be committed to it because I was creating it with the purpose to create something beautiful. And so we talk about God's purpose and God's creation. And part of that, the second half of that is that humans, all of life together, are completely dependent on God for creation and then for sustaining that creation. Somewhat of an obvious reality that follows the fact that God created, but something we conveniently forget about as we go about our lives. We have fooled ourselves into thinking we are our own creators, that we are independent, we are in charge, we are masters of our fates. We are finite, and we would not have been without God's good creation. And one way to read this total dependence on God is to make us passive. We could sit back and do nothing since we can't do anything without the will of God holding us up. But when we understand the first point, that God created us out of love, and that God has a purpose in creating us, that then should animate us to be active. We who are created out of love, created by a loving God, should then be interested in loving others. If God creates with the hope of having communion with us, then should not our life be devoted to developing communion with others? We can say that we should strive for relationships with others because we know that creation is good. Again, God called it that back in Genesis 1, and therefore we're called to value all of creation, no matter what our initial opinion of it may be. I do not care much for mosquitoes. If I'm honest, I don't really like cold weather. But God created mosquitoes. God created all of the seasons, and so I should respect the order of all of creation because God has called them good. It goes to people too. When I think back to my time spent in airplanes, it's not hard to find people that I am perhaps not eager to spend hours crammed into a hollow metal tube with. Flying on a commercial plane means you are intimately packed into a place with all sorts of people and all sorts of personalities, some of which have some more sharp edges than others. And it's so easy for us to judge these people or to think that they don't matter or they matter less than others, but they matter to God. Each and every one of them crafted in the image of God, and we're called, right, to coexist, to live together in relationship with Him. In Genesis, God said, "It is not good for man to be alone." We coexist. And our relationship with God and God's relationship with each of us calls us to be in relationship with one another. And we continue to be challenged because we believe that creation is dynamic. God continues to be active. We do not say that God is like a clockmaker who set things in motion and then stepped back. We believe that God continues to be active in creation. The same Spirit that moved over the waters in the beginning continues to act, liberating people to move towards our common goal, our common purpose, the reign of God. The new creation is in front of us, and that is a perfectly realized fellowship with God. So we've established God as a creator of all things. God stands alone as Lord of all creation. And what Paul states from our reading from Colossians is that we are to be absolutely clear that whatever we attribute to God as creator to God as creator is also due to Jesus Christ. Christ is completely equal with God in every respect over all of creation. Whether we can see it or not, no matter how powerful it may seem in this world, Jesus Christ is Lord over all of it. And Paul is clear about Christ's mission. Just as He is Lord of all things, He has come to reconcile all things to Himself. We who were separated from God by sin are reconciled by Christ and His atoning death so that we are holy and blameless before God. This gospel truth, Paul says, is proclaimed in all of creation. Paul is telling us that not one corner in all of this earth that Christ has not come to redeem. We know that God created all out of nothing, meaning it all belongs to God, and Christ, who is equal with God, has come for all of it. Obviously, it has huge implications on our lives. For starters, When we believe that God is the designer, we should probably spend a lot of time reading the instructions that God left us. Just like I wouldn't want my pilot to fly the plane without a thorough understanding of the manual that Boeing designed on how to fly that plane. It's foolish for me to live my life without learning how God, my designer, wants me to live this life that God gave me. Every day I choose not to read the Bible is a day where I'm telling God I know how to live better than God knows how I should live. Secondly, if God is the creator of every corner of the universe, then God is the creator and sustainer of every corner of my life too. There is not an area of my life where Jesus Christ is not Lord. And that means that every part of my life is designed to be in full relationship with and give glory to God. This is terribly hard for us to acknowledge in reality. I can say that it's true, but the second I go back into the world and I start living my life, I live it like it's mine. I decide which parts I'll let God into and which parts I keep for myself. I hold back because I don't want to give it all over. Finally, if God created the world and everything in it and designed it so that it would live in community with God and with one another, then the way I view the world around me needs to change. The world isn't filled with resources that are just there to enrich me, from which I pick and choose which ones I want to interact with and which ones I want to discard and ignore. I'm created to interact with all of it because we all fit together, and so I am to follow the Holy Spirit and interact with everyone. God has come to reconcile himself to the whole world, and so I should be prepared to love the whole world. Tim Keller talks about how God might love cities more than anything else because that's where the most people, the most images of God are. And the implication is that when I see anyone, I should react to them as though each and every one of them were crafted in the image of God. And think about how I can be a partner with that person for eternity. So I should start working on that now, encountering them in a spirit of love and grace, imitating the way God encounters me. It's so easy to write people off in my head and think, I don't want to interact with that person. I don't want to be involved with that person, that situation. God never did that. God has such value on every corner of creation that Christ came to reconcile all of it. And therefore, if it matters that much to God, it should matter to each and every one of us. That is a tall order. But that's what our charge is, since God is our creator and our sustainer and our redeemer and our future hope. This world is God's creation. And so may we live like all of it matters to God.